Today we remember 20 years ago the attacks on the United States, September 11th, 2001. I think everyone that was alive and working at that time can recall where they were the day that they heard about it, where they were when the towers fell. Me personally, I wasn't in law enforcement yet, but because of that day is the reason I'm sitting here today and serving as your Indian River County Sheriff. I made the decision that day that I was going to go into law enforcement, and shortly thereafter entered the police academy, which ultimately led to my career here at the Indian River County Sheriff's Office. I know growing up as a kid, my grandparents were always dedicated in their remembrances of Pearl Harbor, and for me, it was a very difficult decision to cancel this particular event today. It hurt my heart, and I wanted for us to all be able to come together. Unfortunately, due to COVID, our agency had many members who were very sick with COVID, and we just weren't able to have an event today.
A police officer's prayer. Lord, I ask for courage. Courage to face and conquer my own fears. I ask for strength. Strength of the body to protect others and strength of spirit to lead others. I ask for dedication. Dedication to my job to do it well. Dedication to my community to keep it safe. Give me, Lord, concern for others who trust me and compassion for those who need me. And please, Lord, through it all, be by my side.
On September 11, 2001, almost 3,000 people lost their life during the attacks at the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and aboard U.S. Airlines Flight 93. At 8:46 a.m. on that morning, the tragic terroristic events began to take place, with a passenger plane being flown into Tower 1 of the Twin Towers in New York City. A second passenger plane struck Tower 2 at 9:03 a.m. At 9:37 a.m., a passenger plane flew into the Pentagon building. At 10:03 a.m., a passenger plane crashed into the field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The people of the United States sustained senseless losses of life, and in less than an hour and a half, these attacks were intended to destroy our way of life. We have been forever changed since those tragic events, and the precious lives that were taken from us must never be forgotten. The innocent victims of the emergency responders who lost their lives must always be held in our memory and in our honor.
As we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the events that took place on September 11th, 2001, we need to give pause and remember those that gave their lives on that fateful day the attack took place that shook this nation. We remember the citizens that died on that day, the 2,763 from the Twin Towers, the 189 from the Pentagon, and from that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where 44 died during those attacks. To the first responders of the Fire Department of New York City, who lost 443 that day. To the 23 police officers from the New York City Police Department. To the 37 officers of the Port Authority Police Department. And to the 8 EMTs and paramedics from the private services that responded and who died while trying to rescue victims on that day. We also need to remember those members of our military and our intelligence agencies that mobilized and deployed to foreign lands to track those responsible for the attack, as well as secure the interest and the borders of this great country. We are forever indebted to you and for your service and for those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice by so many. And finally, to the families of all those that have been mentioned. There are no words of comfort that can be said and no deed that can be done to comfort you. Know that this is a grateful nation and that each of you has had to carry an enormous weight with you. Thank you.
Today is a somber reminder that 20 years ago, We lost so many great Americans. And then, of course, throughout the last 20 years in the long war in Afghanistan, all the other service members that we've lost as a result. It's just an incredibly, a time that we can never forget, that we as Americans must come together, that we must remember and be like we were in those days right after 9/11 in 2001, and that we should all be united as Americans together today and in the days going forward as we continue to struggle with the aftermath of these events. 20 years later, it feels like it was just moments ago. I want to take time to remember all those that we lost, to remember the great police, fire, everyone that responded, civilians who responded to help out in those days. They were all heroes, and they were lost. The greatest attack since Pearl Harbor.
So 20 years later, September 11th, 2001, I was actually in that conference room just to my left of my office here in a meeting, and the TV was on, and we actually saw the news that day, the horrific news, and as the second plane struck the South Tower. So we certainly remember where we were on that terrible, terrible day. We certainly will never forget. We will always remember. My son was actually born in March of 2001 and was only just under 6 months old, and now is 20, along with the 20-year anniversary for that, again, terrible, terrible event. And it's up to us as law enforcement and our community to certainly never forget and always remember everyone that sacrificed that day, to the public safety workers that are even losing their lives still from working at Ground Zero, to the public safety employees that lost their life that day, to all the people that were in the building who lost their life, their families. We certainly owe it to all of them to never forget and always remember. God bless.
September 11th, 2001 is our generation's Pearl Harbor, our day of infamy. And like any major tragedy involving the catastrophic loss of life, two words must always be spoken: never forget. On this, the 20th anniversary of that attack on our nation, we must never forget the over 3,000 people who died in the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, or in that field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. We must never forget the countless people who have perished since as a result of injuries and illnesses that they contracted while working at Ground Zero. But more importantly, we must never forget the hatred for this country that perpetuated that attack in the first place. Americans must never forget who their enemies are, whether they are foreign or domestic. Americans must also be mindful when they tell the history of this incident, because history can never be rewritten. And as we remember and reflect on the past, we must also look forward to the future and remember that true freedom can never be achieved without the proper limitation of government. If we forget these things, then anyone who has ever died in the name of freedom will have died in vain, and we will cease to be the greatest nation on earth. God bless you, Indian River County, and God bless the United States of America.
20 years have passed since those horrific attacks, and for some, an entire generation has been born and raised post the tragic events. The youth of today need to know about these attacks, our losses, and our resiliency of the American people since these attacks. As I say, we must never forget. I would like to share my personal story, as I can never forget. On September 8th, 2001, my father had passed suddenly here in the state of Florida. We then, as a family, chose to respond to New York City, our birthplace, his birthplace, to have a proper funeral. In doing so, we flew into New York City's John F. Kennedy Airport on September 10th, as we were planning on the morning of the 11th to plan for his funeral. At 8:46 a.m., all screens have changed. The radio alerts came out. There was a plane that struck the Twin Towers. It was believed as an accident, and within moments, we knew it was an attack. And those attacks were intended to destroy everything we know in civilization. But that's not what happened. We watched, we learned, we responded, and countless emergency responders drove into that location to do whatever they could for your safety and recovery. And unfortunately, so many of them were lost in the process. I remember that day very vividly, as later on during the day I heard on the radio accounts that they were asking for all retired New York City police officers to come if they could to assist. By nightfall, I chose to do that, and responding to the scene of Ground Zero, it was, to the emergency responders, organized chaos. It was a heavy response area, and there was tremendous amount of uniformed personnel and equipment. While I did answer the call, there truly was no place for a volunteer, someone who had retired, who had the heart in the right place, to be able to assist at that juncture. There was no mechanism set up yet. Later on, I returned home and stated that we would be back. We then had the funeral for my father, somewhat limited, as there was no trains, there was no planes, there was no vehicles, there was no movement. The city was constrained, and we did what we could. I will tell you that in the days to come, I learned that so many of the emergency responders that I had trained with, New York City police officers, New York City firefighters, New York City paramedics that I had worked with, that I knew, that I shared dinners with, that I knew their families, they were close to retirement. Dozens of them were lost in the process. Yes, it was very painful. I did notice that something very great happened out of this process, was that the resiliency and the strength and the fabric of the community was not impaled. It kept on going. There were flags raising, there was support, there was people waiting, there were restaurants and feeding the emergency responders, and there was such a cooperative effort that I knew that they did not knock down the spirit of our people. Unfortunately, they did take away a lot of lives that will never recover, and many families are not recovered. And our way of life has been altered, but it has not been eliminated. So I say, in that process, finally we were able to come home. I remember calling the sheriff, as I was his spokesman here in River County, and I said, there's no way for me to get home. Right now there's no vehicles and no planes and no trains, and he said, don't worry about it, just stay there and take care of your family. We have a lot going on here, as I learned that the terrorists had actually trained here in Vero Beach. So several days later, we were able to secure a flight to get home. We were the second flight out, and We were on a JetBlue airliner that had to wait a long time because the first plane out was Air Force One. It was escorted by F-16s. And then it was our turn, and you could hear a pin drop on the plane. Everyone waving, holding American flags and waving them, provided by JetBlue. And we were escorted by F-16s out into the airspace. It was a very painful experience for me, for my family, and for everyone who was there at the time, and for this great nation. Everyone was affected. I want our youth to understand what had occurred, and there's no greater way than to respond to New York City, to go to the museum. The museum that they have developed was parts of all of the process that had happened during these horrific attacks. Your life will change if you tour this museum. That is what I wanted to share with you, because we could never forget. It's easy to say we can never forget, but never forget from the heart, because we were changed as a people, and we can never show this to others, how vulnerable we were. And I believe that we are no longer as vulnerable as we were, and a lot of things have happened to ensure that these type of events don't take place, but they did take place. Please never forget and honor those great Americans that were lost during these horrific attacks.
Thank you for taking time to view this video, and for everyone else who gave their words and thoughts for our agency. I want to say God bless the United States, God bless Indian River County and all of our first responders who put their lives on the line every single day to protect our community. Without them, we would have chaos. And so I'm just grateful for all of you, and for allowing me to serve as your Indian River County Sheriff, to be here, and to continued vigilance in the fight against terrorism, to ensure that we never have an event like 9/11 again.